unless taxpayers have a right to challenge the abuse of the Establishment Clause. And he said, for example, what's to stop the president from building a mosque, let's say, to ease relations with the Muslim world? He used all these good examples. So we won then. We basically were winning in the Seventh Circuit. And, of course, the U.S. government...
That must have made you very happy.
It did for a while until, of course, the U.S. government appealed their loss to the United States Supreme Court. And then the day that the Supreme Court announced that they were going to take the case, because they don't have to grant cert.
And that means you would win altogether, because if they don't take it, that means
then that's the law. Yeah, it stands. If the Supreme Court had said, no, we don't want to take this case, then that would have been it, right? But the Supreme Court did grant cert and did hear the case, and our hearts dropped, because when we started our lawsuit, Sandra Day O'Connor was on the court, and she was a true swing vote. And if we were counting the votes based on their past record, we were pretty sure we had 5 out of the 9 votes, right? Mm-hmm. Sandra Day O'Connor retired, and then Alito replaced her.
Oh.
Then we thought, oh, wait a minute. And in fact, it was like a month later that he first sat on the court. So then we said, do we have a swing decision or not? What's he going to do? Our case was the very first religion case that Alito heard. And it wasn't the issues, it wasn't the merits, it was whether we had standing to sue or not. And we lost. It was in 2007. And 5 of the justices, at that time there were 5 Roman Catholic justices on the Supreme Court, now there are 6. And all 5 of the Roman Catholic conservative justices voted against us, and 4 voted for us.
Well, what a coincidence.
Well, it maybe is a coincidence, but the 4 who voted on our side wrote eloquent dissents to the majority opinion, and basically agreeing with just about every major newspaper in the country was on our side. The New York Times editorialized in our favor. The LA Times did. Mm-hmm. The ACLU wrote a wonderful amicus, friend of the court, brief for us. So did Americans United, Center for Inquiry, American Atheists, and then some panel of historians, legal historians, wrote a brief for us too, which showing that the original founders and all that. None of that swayed the 5 conservative justices, and so we lost the case. And it's called Hine. Hine was the White House director of Faith-Based Initiative. Hine versus Freedom from Religion Foundation, which since that time has made it harder for groups like ours to get into court. It's raised the bar for standing. We can't just claim immediate taxpayer standing if there's no congressional appropriation. If there is, if Congress had said, here, Obama, take this money to build a church, well, then we would have standing, right? Or if somebody shows direct injury on the other side, if somebody who was applying for that money was discriminated against, there would be direct injury. Or the other recourse is that this is possible, but probably would never happen. But the other recourse is for Congress to tell the president, don't spend the money on that. You could do that too, if we could get enough members of Congress to pass a bill saying, here's your general appropriation, but don't spend it on this.
I see.
There's a political solution
so there's
as well.
A couple different ways to go.
Yeah, there's ways to go, but that would be the longest shot.
Let's talk about what's happening now. Now, you just had a lawsuit with Judge Crabb ruling for you against the National Prayer. So let's talk a little bit about that. How did that come about?
National Day of Prayer. 1952, Billy Graham went to Washington, D.C., had a 6-week revival meeting. Thousands of people were there, and he called on the country to have a National Day of Prayer to bring our country back to Christ. Very evangelical, very pro-Christian. And Congress very quickly passed a National Day of Prayer in 1952. In fact, it was introduced into the Senate by Senator Absalom Robertson, and you can guess whose father he is. He had a famous son named Pat. And the religious right was all happy, because who during the 1950s would be seen voting against God? The Cold War and communism and atheism and all that stuff that was going on back then. McCarthyism. And in fact, that was the decade when we got Under God in the Pledge, and when we got In God We Trust as the national motto, and other things. We have another lawsuit that goes back to the 50s as well. So the mid-1950s was a pretty bad time for state-church separation. And President Truman signed it, and every president since then has been directed by Congress to set aside a National Day of Prayer. And each president picked a certain time when they wanted to do it. Some of them kind of forgot until the last minute, and they quickly passed it. And it made it hard for the religious right to organize this thing, so they petitioned again, and they got the law changed under Reagan in 1988 to make it the first Thursday of every May. I don't know if they picked Thursday because they thought we should honor Thor or not, but in any event, they picked the first Thursday of every May. Ever since then, and their rationale was to make it easier for Christians to organize and plan this big National Day of Prayer thing. It's been organized by a private group called the National Day of Prayer Task Force, which is currently headed, it used to be headed by Campus Crusade founder Vonette Bright, Campus Crusade for Christ, evangelical. Now it's headed by Shirley Dobson, who's the wife of James Dobson, the founder of Focus on the Family. In fact, the National Day of Prayer Task Force is housed in the same building with Focus on the Family in Colorado Springs. So it is a clear pro-Christian evangelical, although they call themselves Judeo-Christian, and often they use Old Testament verses, so that it shows how inclusive they are, that they include Jews and evangelical Christians.
I see. Well, tell me first what's wrong with the National Day of Prayer. Why are you against it? And second, proceed to the outcome of Judge Crabb's ruling.
Yeah. Members of our group and members all through, ever since the 50s, have been complaining about this. And not just atheists. Jews have been frozen out. Liberal Christians have felt frozen out of these events because it's supposedly the territory of evangelicals. People like Pat Boone and Jesse Helms and Strom Thurmond and all these people were like calling it our not just a day of Christian prayer, but a day of evangelical Christian prayer. So it's divisive, and we introduced to the court when we took our lawsuit in 2008 all this evidence from newspaper reports and from history that the Day of Prayer has been very divisive. It's excluded people, and not just us atheists, but in 2008 we decided to sue President Bush because Bush is the executive of this congressional directive and the press secretary. And then when Obama was elected, our lawsuit was still live, so we had to switch it to Obama and Press Secretary Gibbs. And Obama chose to continue fighting this lawsuit, and we took it to federal court in Madison, Wisconsin. And on April the 15th, 2010, Judge Barbara Crabb issued a decision agreeing with us, declaring the National Day of Prayer unconstitutional because it crosses the line. It's not just acknowledgement. It's just not just an accommodation. It's not just some historical recognition. It's an actual call by our president to a religious ritual. And she said in her decision that crosses the line. Christmas doesn't cross the line because it's secular enough. Thanksgiving doesn't cross the line either. And she even doesn't think that Under God and the Pledge crosses the line. We disagree with her there, but in any event, she did think that the president declaring a day of prayer crosses the line from a secular neutral government encouraging a private religious exercise. So when the decision came down, the religious right was really mad. They're still mad at us. You should go look at the National Day of Prayer Task Force webpage or the Alliance Defense Fund, who's defending them, and they're almost in tears. The atheists are attacking American values, right next to a big donate button, you know. And they're probably raising millions of dollars on this thing, which they should. It's a free country, right? They can do that.
Well, the millions of dollars only gets it a certain way because if it's wrong or right, that's what the judges are for to decide.
Yeah.
And that's why the government is not run by a popularity contest. It's run by who's right and who's wrong, and who's to decide that but the Supreme Court and the circuit judges around the country.
People who disagree with her decision should read the decision. Seems like all this media we've been doing, the people haven't even read it. They've read 2 or 3 sentences that they read in the paper. But it's an eloquent, it's a careful decision. She didn't badmouth prayer. In fact, she said prayer might be a great thing for this country. She said prayer might be needed and wonderful for America, but it has to be private and voluntary. It can't be directed by the government. And she knew she was going to get flack from this, and boy, has she gotten flack. A lot of people are calling her, I can't even tell you some of the things that they've been calling her, but she has ruled on the Constitution in favor of religious liberty, right? She agreed with us on our La Crosse case, the 10 Commandments on city property. She saw through the sham of the city in La Crosse, Wisconsin, selling this little piece of the park so that the 10 Commandments could stay there, but she was overturned by the 7th Circuit. similar to what just happened with the Mojave Desert Cross
Oh
issue.
yes, let's talk about that.
Same
Now,
idea.
the Buddhists wanted to put a memorial next to the cross. This is what I am kind of angry about, is that here we have a cross that supposedly depicts a symbol of devotion by the military to our fallen soldiers. And the Buddhists wanted to put up a shrine next to it, and they refused. Now this is kind of contradictory here, because why would the government allow a cross but not allow any other memorial up there from a different religion?
Well, that shows you the intent